Hello, everybody. Welcome back to High Ground. My name is Tanner, and today we're going to be doing predictions for the top 8 of CJX's Reload event 2025. So, it's been kind of a crazy event in terms of how things have gone down, as well as which teams have advanced into the top 8. I think we've seen some surprises and some teams make it through that we did expect, but honestly, at a lot of points, it felt like just about any team could be eliminated, and just about any team could have made it through. So, I got 4 out of 8, not spectacular, but I don't imagine that too many people got more than 4 out of 8. Going in the last day, I was basically locked at 4 out of 8 because of how the draw went, which teams chose to play against which other teams. FaZe was playing up against Furia, and I think they were sort of even up against Dark Zero in that basically only one of them could qualify. Had Dark Zero won their match, which they should have, they they kind of choked that match. They were up 6-3 against G2. They lost 5 rounds in a row. Had they won that, they had a decent shot, but it would have come down to, I think, the round differential between FaZe and Furia. So all this to say that, yeah, it was basically going to be Furia or Dark Zero or FaZe. So even if Dark Zero didn't choke, I think I still would have only got the 4 points. Space Station got smoked, so they weren't really in the conversation. M80 did play on the last day, and they even won, but I think the only way they were going to qualify was 7-0ing Cloud9, and then a bunch of other things had to also go their way. So extremely unlikely they were going to make it through, even if they did get a 7-0. So I think I picked pretty reasonably. I think the teams that did end up making it through that I didn't predict were big surprises. I think other teams that people reasonably would have picked were like Liquid, G2, Secret, teams like that. But what ended up happening is Cyclops, FearX, Elevate, and Wildcard were the other 4 teams to go through, along with W7M, Falcons, Loud, and Furia. And you'll notice that the 4 teams on the lower portion of the screen were the 4 teams that I predicted, and the upper 4 teams were the ones that I did not predict. And so that might clue you into the fact that one side of the bracket looks a lot stronger. So I think a lot of people probably think whoever wins this semifinal, whether that be W7M, Falcons, Loud, or Furia, will probably also win the final. But we have seen some pretty special things out of a lot of these teams. They were in best of ones, and a lot of these teams did play against sort of the other kind of bottom of the barrel teams, and we'll look at how each of these teams performed against the other teams at the event. So Furia, Loud, W7M, all from Brazil, and then Elevate is a full Brazilian team, even though they're technically representing APAC. We have Cyclops and FearX from APAC, and then again, kind of Elevate. We have Falcons, only team from Europe, and we have Wildcard, the only team from NA, and I think that's a really big surprise. If you told somebody that there was only going to be one NA team in the top 8, they would certainly have thought it was going to be Space Agent or Dark Zero or M80, but here we are with Wildcard making it through. Good for them. I hope that they can make a little bit of a run as, a person from NA, but we'll have to see. And also, I don't think too many people are big Elevate fans because of the fact that, all Brazilian team playing in APAC is kind of lame. Okay, Cyclops versus FearX. Let's talk about it. FearX undoubtedly has been the better team throughout the event, and in fact, they beat Cyclops in the head-to-head. Let's go take a look here. So FearX, they played up against Cyclops. They won 7-4. They beat G2 7-1. They beat Space Station 7-3. They lost to Falcons 7-3, so no real shame there. And then they beat BDS 7-5. So no overtime in any of their games. They won 4 out of 5, and 3 of them were even pretty decisive, including their match up against Cyclops. So maybe the tables will turn. It is going to be a best of 3 rather than a best of 1, and there's a lot more. There's been a lot of reps for both these teams. Maybe FearX has settled in poorly compared to Cyclops, but we'll just have to see. Doesn't seem super likely. They're on 4-1. Cyclops is only on 2-2. So again, they lost to FearX. They beat Elevate, who, are in the top 8, but still, I wouldn't say have been one of the most impressive teams at the event. They got smoked by BDS, and then they won a close one and a sort of contentious one with how one of the rounds played out, or I guess was replayed up against Liquid. But anyways, they got 2 wins, 2 losses, fine. But FearX undoubtedly is the favorite. And they look like perhaps, and this is just based off some best of ones and whatever, but perhaps the strongest looking APAC team we've seen in years, probably since old Damwon Kia, which is fitting because actually 3 of the players from that team, Coded, Woogieman, and Rin, are all on the current FearX team. So I think they're the pretty clear choice. I could, I guess see Cyclops pulling this out, but you have every reason to pick FearX, not really much reason to pick Cyclops, except for, if you're a big Cyclops enjoyer, I suppose. Elevate up against Wildcard. Let's see how these 2 teams fared. Wildcard actually end up as the #1 seed, 27 bullets, a pretty big gap between them and everyone else, but bullets were, if you ask most people, pretty Mickey Mouse. This whole event sort of was, but it was kind of fun to watch, I would say. They demolished Scars, who I think were pretty clearly the worst team in the event. They lost to Falcons pretty handily, although a lot of those rounds they probably should have won. They maybe even could have won the game had they not trolled so many rounds, but I think at the very least this should have been a closer game. They smoked G2 7-3, they smoked SSG 7-3, and they smoked Secret 7-2. So G2 and Space Station, neither of them look spectacular at this event, but historically they're pretty strong teams. So I think this is a pretty nice repertoire besides Scars. Again, they're pretty bad, but they beat some pretty decent teams. They only lost to Falcons, so that's pretty good. Then if we compare it to Elevate, they lost to Furia, no shame there, but they lost to Cyclops, and their only wins came up against Talon and Scars, who, if we go down here, were actually the two worst performing teams in the event. Those were the only teams with no wins, and they each had some close games up against Cloud9 and Elevate specifically. But yeah, pretty clearly they were the two worst teams in the event. Those are the only teams that Elevate has beaten. And again, Wildcard, some pretty solid wins. I think Wildcard, the pretty clear choice. I guess one thing Elevate does have going for them is they are a bunch of Brazilians playing in Brazil, and they are, I think, on average, a more experienced team. They have the likes of Hugzord as their coach. They have Psycho on the team. They have Ion. So I guess Wildcard has like Kanzan, who has been to several international events, but even for him, it's been a while. This is the first time that he'll have qualified since being on Wildcard. I guess technically they didn't qualify for the event. They were just invited, but they did qualify for the top 8. So yeah, I'm going to go with Wildcard there. Then we have W7M versus Falcons, probably the toughest pick, I think, for most people. I think the other ones feel fairly cut and dry, but we'll have to see how they actually play out. Anyways, let's see how these two teams have fared. Keep in mind, Falcons, they were in all 4 grand finals this year, including Esports World Cup, which they won. W7M was in 2 of the grand finals this year. They were in Esports World Cup, where they did not win, and then they won the next major. They had sort of a poor performance at SI, not making a very deep run, but now they replaced Dash with Palu, and Dash actually also in the top 8 on Wildcard. So yeah, let's take a look at these teams' runs. Falcons, they've been a little bit shaky, but even the ones that they lost that were fairly close, they took a 7-4 loss up against Loud. They beat Wildcard 7-3. Again, this probably should have been closer than a 7-3. They lost to M80 7-5, and they beat FearX 7-3. So not spectacular, not terrible, maybe terrible by the standards set by the players on this team, but not too bad. It's not like Elevate, who just farmed the 2 worst teams in the event and still barely won both those matches. Then we have W7M, who ran it even closer up against M80 than Falcons did. They had a close one up against FaZe, and they had a close one up against Dark Zero. So they're actually the only team undefeated in this event, but they're actually one of the only teams that have only played 3 matches, because they got a bye in the 4th day, and then they were automatically given some points based on some factors in that day, which then qualified them, so they didn't have to play on day 5. So yeah, only played 3 games, but they won all of them, but they were all either max regulation or overtime, and they're all against pretty reasonable teams. Yes, Dark Zero and M80 and FaZe, actually none of these guys qualified, but they were all teams that I think a lot of people did expect to qualify. So reason to pick either of them. I think I'm going to go with Falcons. They're probably a little bit hotter. They've had 1 fewer off day. They had a pretty dominant game in their final day. And W7M, yeah, it does show a lot of resolve to squeak out these close games. Maybe Palu's previous team would not have squeaked out such wins, but I could definitely see it going either way. I guess I'll go with Falcons, though, even though they have sort of betrayed me when I've picked them in some recent events, but I guess that was mostly in grand finals. Then we have Loud up against Furia finally, and let's see how these guys have done. Loud went 7-4 up against Falcons, pretty solid win to have. They had a close loss up against Secret. They smoked Fnatic, and they also smoked BDS. Whereas Furia, yeah, they got a good win over Elevate. They got a really strong win over BDS, even more dominant than the win Loud got over them. They had a win over Secret, whereas Loud had a loss to Secret. They weirdly got smoked by Dark Zero. This feels like a bit of an outlier. I mean, obviously, look at the score lines of the other games, and then they beat FaZe 7-3. So they did better against Secret. They did better against BDS. They went 4-1, whereas Loud went 3-1. I'm gonna go with Furia. They feel like the safe pick. I think Loud has it in them to pull this off, but Furia certainly the favorite. And I think this is probably going to be the consensus. Maybe I'll do a follow-up video on the other on the semifinals and the final when that comes about. We'll have to see. I don't know if I'll for sure do that. Maybe I'll just do a quick post, but whatever the case, I hope everybody's predictions go well. I'm going to hit save here so I don't forget. If you're watching this video shortly after it comes out, you have about a day and a half, but if you're watching it maybe the next day, make sure you get these predictions in. Don't forget if you're really interested in winning these things. Okay, that's going to do it for me. I will catch you guys next time.